how does adversarial capital challenge us, and what does trusted capital seek to do to address that challenge?
So right now, we use CFIUS, Countering Foreign Investment in the U.S. Authority, to be able as the government to intervene in transactions and even online transactions where we believe critical technology, critical manufacturing capability has been procured by adversaries of the U.S. That's necessary. It's difficult, it's time consuming, but it's not sufficient. So what we believe is we need to get on the other side of this, not only defense, but play offense. So we'd like to think that capital markets are very, very efficient and that capital finds companies in need of investment. And then there's a virtuous cycle where everything goes along. For the largest part, that is true. However, we wouldn't have this adversarial capital coming in and investing in companies if that was a totally efficient market. So what we have been doing, really prototyping for the last year, is coming up with a rule set by which we can look at companies and understand the beneficial ownership, who actually owns the company. Also look at capital providers, whether it's a venture capitalist or even a family fund, understand the true source of their funds, go through this rule set, basically proclaim them clean on either side, and then put them into an electronic marketplace that's kind of like a dating service where one can look at the other. And then we come DoD branding saying, here are segments of the marketplace that we believe are important for our future. And hey, by the way, here's a company that's gotten a small business innovative research loan. And here's a company that has this and that, so that they're somewhat branded by DoD. We have had some live events and some virtual events, but we are on the cusp of actually putting this into an electronic marketplace because we know that there are sources of capital out there looking for investments that not only have a good return, but contribute to our national security. I think there's a huge unmet need for that. It's not simple to do. That's why we've been talking about it for a year and very quietly working in the background. But I have great expectations that in a few months, you're going to see this out in a very, very significant way.
That's fascinating. I think it's, if I understand you, it's going to have a kind of twin benefits. On the one hand, it would counter the adversarial capital, which is objective number one, why you focus on this year. But second, it would give an opportunity for new and different types of capital, venture capital, for example, to start looking at the defense sector, the needs of the Department of Defense, where in the past, perhaps they haven't focused on it because it was too much of a risk. Perhaps they didn't know if the Department of Defense would really come through on funding the areas where, some startups said, hey, there's a need for this in the department. If it gets the thumbs up from the Department of Defense, there's a little more confidence that the investment would see a return.
Absolutely. And hopefully these could be pathfinders so that you do something for Department of Defense, and then there's other applications with just security, and then perhaps just general commercial applications as well. So again, we're looking at a virtuous cycle here so that we can be the catalyst to get things started.
So virtuous cycle, what I understand means that, hey, we're not going to ask you to invest in something, and then we're going to classify it all and restrict you to a classified DoD market. Did I understand you correctly there?
Correct. And in fact, that's something that, frankly, during my time here, I feel that in the sort of super classified, the SAP world, if you will, special access programs, that we have held those too tightly, and there are only a few in the defense industrial base, typically larger companies that really benefit from that. So we have inserted effort, nothing to do with COVID here, but trying to reach out a little bit more broadly, because there are many, many mid-tier companies out there that have the wherewithal to be a very significant supplier to DoD, but they just can't get an invitation club. So we're trying to get them in.
So a few more areas of focus, and then we'll have to pop up and let you get back to the demands of the Pentagon. But on this point, there hasn't really been many new entrants into the defense industrial base. Certainly, one that would have a market cap, let's say, of $1 billion or more. You can look at Palantir and SpaceX as a couple examples. But there has been an increase of late of VC money behind companies that are seeking to support national defense and security, perhaps not limited to it exclusively, not necessarily pure play, although there are some. Give me a little bit of your perspective as to the change in the time you've been in office of more companies entering this space, companies that are trying to recruit out of, let's say, traditional Silicon Valley kind of areas. There's obviously, we have Defense Innovation Unit, which of course you oversee. Tell me about that evolution and to the extent that that has really been impacting the defense industrial base and some of the challenges you see going forward to increase their participation.
I think that there are lots of tentacles out there reaching to what I call non-traditionals, each of the services, whether it be Futures Command or whether it be AFWorks or whether it be SOCOM with SOFWorks. There are a lot of good efforts reaching out. We haven't done anything at scale yet. And one of the things we're trying to do with our trusted capital is to leverage all of those very innovative groups. Also, Defense Digital Services, Brett Goldstein does a great job with them now, and kind of leverage all of that for the greater good. We found, as mentioned earlier, that just getting into DoD is a bit of a conundrum if you don't know to. So we actually earlier this year came up with what we call a welcome mat to DoD, which is basically a placemat with a whole bunch. It's electronic, but we have printouts of it as well, of hyperlinks for where you go in DoD to get certain information or get your company registered, all those kinds of things. The more we communicate that, the better. And I go back again to the industrial associations, the whole COVID crisis. One of, again, the silver linings is that 4 times a week for a long time, now a little bit less, we've had telecons, we've had webinars. So we have reached out regularly to about 15 industrial associations and some that we never dealt with before, push all this information and pull them in as well. So I hope we can keep that going. I'm hoping as well that the trusted capital will give a way for some of these companies to come in. But it really all comes down to communication. And I'm always hoping that industry thinks of our industrial policy team under A&S as sort of the help desk for DoD, and that they'll come in.
One last question on this category, and we'll jump to a brief comment on allies and then end on budget. But you mentioned kind of need to do it at scale. One metric for whether or not you're truly realizing these new technologies bring in new entrants at scale would be programs of record. To the extent programs of record bring in and are awarded to those companies, let's just say that aren't quote unquote the traditionals, or they're done differently, which is maybe the same, where it's not a 5 to 7 or plus year window, but actually you're churning things out more at a commercial pace. Do you see, let's focus on the program of record, for example, a change in the way programs of record are awarded and organized in the future in light of software being far more of a focus and relevant than, let's just say, it had been in the past?
Absolutely. One of the largest policy efforts we've had in A&S over the last few years is totally rewriting the 5000 series, all the policy around acquisition. And what we've evolved to is what I call an adaptive acquisition framework. So there are multiple pathways. One of the key new pathways is a software pathway, because frankly, most of our significant systems are hardware defined, but software enabled, and you can do many, many turns on that software. So we're very, very fortunate to work with the Defense Innovation Board, Eric Schmidt, and the whole team to help us on a software acquisition and practices study that we published. We've just finished the first year's implementation. In fact, on my desk right now, I have that report that's to go to Congress that I have to look at. And we are working with the Hill on some pilot projects where we have what we call a software color of money. So it's not the 1 year, 2 year money, because you don't do software that way. And if we're going to do Agile and DevOps, talk about this all day, you just need to do it differently. So I'm excited. We have a different way to do software. Secondly, the other thing I'll point out in the adaptive acquisition framework is we have taken an authority that we were given about 3 or 4 years ago called middle tier acquisition. So it's a rapid, urgent need. It's not a big 5,000 project. It's somewhere in the middle. You don't have to go through the joint staff for the requirements process. You can just get going and prototype or produce something, get it in the field within 6 months, so you get that experiential learning. That is changing how we're getting into programs of record, because we are coming in with much, much more mature technology, and we can transfer in at a milestone B or C. So I'm excited. I think there's much, much more capability to acquire differently, to get to programs of record eventually, but there's can do without a program of record. Very significant money.
Software color of money, very, very exciting. The congressional staff will have a field day with that color of money. That's it. All right, let's wrap up here. Undersecretary Lord, hitting on 2 subjects, and then we'll let you get back to your duties. The first is we talked a lot of shoring, the need, how we deal with kind of critical requirements of defense industrial fundamentally has to be CONUS, within the United States. But obviously, between competitors and the United States, our comparative advantages are allies. What's happening on the front with allies to the extent that we can bring them in as trusted partners to deal with the innovation and other items for the supply chain that are critical to national defense, that kind of those vulnerabilities have been exposed during COVID?
Absolutely. We obviously have as our second line of effort in our national defense strategy, supporting and growing alliances and partnerships. So the U.S. is differentiated from the rest of the world. When we go to war, we do not go alone, and our allies and partners. I actually have an international cooperation group that has responsibility for over 30 bilateral agreements. I spend a significant amount of my time with our key allies and partners. A very significant portion of that is Canada, the UK, and Australia, part of our national technological innovation base, where they have special consideration, if you will, for sharing intellectual property, for getting perhaps a little bit more sophisticated technology than others. We have really amped up our cooperative research agreements with those countries in the last few years, and we are jointly working on developments that will be mutually beneficial. So as we go through all of these challenges with not wanting to be solely dependent on offshore capability, we have made very, very clear allies and partners how very, very important they are to us. And in fact, every so often when a pronouncement comes out of the White House, I'm on speed dial to some of my fellow national armaments directors, and they're calling me. And, even when we get a little sideways politically, the mill-to-mill bonds are very, very strong. In fact, it was somewhat flattering that when we put out the memo of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base being critical infrastructure, allowing us to get back to work, my UK NAD, my Canadian NAD, my Australian NAD, all called me and said, do you mind if I just cut and paste names and addresses and use that document? And we're like, hey, please go ahead and replicate it. So we have a pretty tight bond.
Do you think that, you mentioned those 4 countries, of course, make a lot of sense, and they're part of the end that you just referenced. Do we think we need to expand that more? Because increasingly, allies and friends are presented with a choice, 5Gs being the most acute example, where if we don't share, if we don't bring them into our side, don't give our allies and friends a good option, they'll go elsewhere, sometimes to a competitor like China. Perhaps not for the most sensitive technologies, but even for technologies that are less sensitive but still relevant to our allies and partners and friends, do we need to do more to expand that cooperation, particularly on innovation, So we're not presented with a hard choice.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I think we need to beef up what we're doing with the current NTIB. We're working on that, but there are many others out there that we could work more closely with. One of the items that I'm dealing with, a few of my colleagues here that I am passionate about currently, is the fact that we have not really revisited what technology we export in a significant way recently. And I am concerned that sometimes we are losing international competitions because as we have increased our capability, we have not increased the capability that we export in a commensurate fashion. And we sometimes are having some of our potential customers, particularly in the Mideast, turn to Russia or China. You see the same thing in India, for instance. So we are having a very focused discussion on, let's rethink this strategic point of view. We might, in fact, be hurting ourselves when we think we're helping ourselves. And a lot of this technology, frankly, the magic sauce is in the manufacturing of it. The technical data package doesn't always give it to you and understood and so forth. But in the next 6 months, I very much hope to open the envelope, particularly on some of the weapons technology that we can export.
Well, I can't wait to have you back at the Reagan National Defense Forum so you can tell everybody about 6 months' time. Last question before we close this podcast and viewing out. The defense budget obviously is critical to accomplishing your work. With COVID and all the spending and the fiscal crisis this country will have to face, are you concerned that there will be an impact on the defense budget? A couple of words, perhaps, on why it's critical to maintain defense spending to accomplish much of what we've discussed here today.
We are concerned that budgets will be flat at best, and flat budgets are actually declining budgets given inflation and so forth. We believe that not only do we have to maintain readiness, but we know we have to modernize after years and years of not investing. Our whole nuclear triad is in the midst of being recapitalized, and we are with zero margin right now in terms of schedule to get that done to maintain capability. So we must invest. And this is why I am so concerned that we get the next version of the CARES Act and we get some money to help take care of some of the incremental costs that were brought on by COVID. There are inefficiencies there, and we don't want that bow wave to roll on and on and on, of making us inefficient for a long time. We also, I think, would be really doing a disservice to the nation and to the world if we do not make programs whole, and if we had to take out of hide, so to speak, all of these inefficiencies that were realized, and we are being very, very careful to make sure we are only accepting for government compensation very real inefficiencies. But if we have to take that cost out of programs and manufacture fewer units, provide fewer services, not have logistics tail, that would be a very bad outcome.
Undersecretary Lord, just from a scale standpoint, how much is required to get healthy? You mentioned Tranche 4 because looking at it, give us a sense, I mean, not precise dollar value, but generally how much more?
I testified a few weeks ago saying it's in the low double digits of billions of dollars.
Okay. The low double digits would be 10 or more. If I understand you.
You're good at math. Great, Roger.
Excellent. I just want to make that clear. Undersecretary Lord, thank you so much for joining us here at the Reagan Institute. We appreciate your participation. We look forward to having you back at the Reagan National Defense Forum December 4th. Really, this was an excellent conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the work we're doing. I'm incredibly proud of my team. They've just really been pushing, especially in the last 3 months. So look forward to seeing you in December.
Great. Thanks, Ellen.
Bye.
Well, good afternoon. I want to thank the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay for having me here. I want to thank Clara Reynolds for hosting. We really appreciate it.
Welcome, everybody.
Thank the First Lady for, she has been a champion for, we're going to be talking about mental health issues, particularly as it relates to the coronavirus pandemic. And she's been a real champion on this now. She, having had our third child at the end of March, has obviously had her hands full. So this is kind of her. She did come with us for a bill signing when we did the water quality legislation a week or two ago, but this is kind of our great way to get back in the saddle. So we appreciate it, and we appreciate all your work. And then we also appreciate Secretary Popple for working so hard at DCF. And then we also have Senate President Wilton Simpson here, who's really been a champion for our youth and also for these mental health initiatives. We have Dr. Jay Reed, who's President and CEO of Appalachia Center up in Tallahassee. Thank you for what you're doing. We have Danny Burgess, who's the former Florida Department of Veterans Affairs Executive Director, also from the Tampa Bay area. And then we have Dakota Dixon, Safety, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So thank you for coming. When the pandemic hit, obviously there's a lot of concern about what the virus is doing, who's getting infected, hospitalizations. Obviously, it's a very critical issue. It is also the case that the pandemic has had other health effects that we're still coming to terms with, and quite frankly, they're going to be with us for a long time. One I've talked about, and pretty much every physician you talk about around hospitals in the state of Florida will talk about the alarming decrease in people in March, particularly March and April, of people who are going to the ED for heart and stroke symptoms. And whether that was out of fear of catching coronavirus, whether it was a belief that there weren't going to be medical services, that has basically allowed some conditions to worsen. And so now you look in ICUs, you have people with those conditions now in Florida and across the country who are in more critical condition, probably would have been had they gotten the care. So the message from those hospitals and from me has been, if you have those, you do need to get care. You also look at what we've done to do things like protecting our nursing homes. We were one of the first states to not allow outside visitors into nursing homes. We feared the introduction of the virus into a population which is by far the most vulnerable to COVID-19, and I think we had to do that. But we also have to recognize that comes at a significant cost in terms of mental well-being, family connection. Now, we in the city, I know other organizations have tried to lessen that by providing things like iPads so that the residents can speak to their family members, and I think that's good, but that has been a really significant price to pay. You also look in hospitals when people are in the hospital, not being able to have family members come in many hospitals. I mean, I've encouraged to try to have the visitation because I think it's important, but you're looking at a situation where you don't want to see this virus be introduced into a hospital situation. So I totally understand that, but that comes at a cost because you're having these real critical moments in people's lives, and then they're cut off from physical presence of their loved ones, and so that comes at a significant cost. We also have our youth who, when you move to distance learning, we're not going to school, we're not seeing their friends as much, and they've had to really see some major changes in their life. So these are all really significant issues. These are all issues that we've got to face in a very direct way. And I'm glad that the folks are here today to have this discussion. We in this most recent legislative session, we really focused on a couple things, but one of them was Senate Bill 1326. The First Lady was involved with that, Chad was involved with it, Senator Simpson was involved with it, and it's really a comprehensive bill tackling a number of issues, not just with mental health, but with child welfare. We had a lot of tough choices to make in the budget. As you know, the revenue situation is different than it was looking in January or February. I had to veto a record amount, $1 billion, but I tried to preserve the things that we view as significant achievements. And so we talked yesterday at the State Board of Education about the increase in teacher compensation to make us number 5 in the nation for average minimum salary. I talked about doing some of the things we've done for our waterways, very, very important. In this year's budget, even after the vetoes, we were able to increase mental health funding in K through 12 public schools by $25 million. So that's a total of $100 million. We have $5.5 million for youth mental health and assistance training for school personnel, and $4 million for mental health services via telehealth. It's very important that we have this funding. It's critical, and we also work very hard at breaking down some of the regulations that prevented there to be more telehealth and more innovation. We want to continue to do that because it really is important. I'm going to turn it over to the first meet, but I think it's really will be instructive about, what's the call volume like with COVID? How is this affecting things? What are you seeing at DCF? How is it affecting veterans? Obviously, the doctor and Wilton. So I'll kick it over to her, but I want to thank everybody. We're going to have to continue. We're going to have to be on multiple fronts on this thing, and the mental health component is one that is going to be with us for a long time.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say it's good of you. Usually don't see the better half very often. He was out the door very early this morning, which he is typically. He missed a doozy on his way out the door because, as many of you may know, we have 3 children, 3 and up. So we have a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-month-old. So it's a little busy in the DeSantis house. My daughter decided that she wanted to make a stroller parade. So I'm happy that we were here on time because my daughter was very particular about who got what stroller and what was on what. And, so being a parent, you get it, right? Everybody can spot for themselves. But we made it here in one piece. And so, but I just appreciate you guys taking the time to come here. I think this is going to be a really great discussion. I was talking to a friend the other day who is doing distant learning in another state. And she has 2 girls who are 10 years old. And I said, how are the girls doing? How are you holding up? And she told me, she goes, well, there's a lot of tears. Oh, are the girls okay? And she goes, no, me. And she's really having a difficult time. And so that's something to take into consideration. We talk about our kids, but we need to talk about the parents. And that everyone is enduring this crisis. And so there's no doubt about it that it's having an impact on our mental health. Before the pandemic, many of you may know that this was a passion of mine, talking about mental wellness and what does that mean for our first responders? What does that mean for our children? What does that mean for our educators? What does that mean just for anyone who just needs to find help? How do they do that simplistically? Now, I think it's safe to say that we're going to be putting this into high gear. This really needs to be a robust part of the conversation. I think about some of the initiatives that I've had the good fortune and really honor to be able to champion. The Hope for Healing initiative, Hope Ambassadors, Hope Innovators. This is working with the Department of Education to try to find best practices for the now $100 million that they put into the budget for mental health for our students. That's up from $75 million to $100 million. The legislature, we appreciate what they've done to do that, and so that's really a great opportunity to provide these services. And I think about something that we did with the Secretary in the Panhandle when we were looking at post-Hurricane Michael. We went out there very early. We saw that there was a need for mental health for the students, and because it was a rural area, because there weren't a lot of providers in the area, we really honed in there to find out how do we provide telemental health. And so we deployed resources to 63 different partners, and we're really ahead of the game and learned a lot about what it takes to provide these services for the kids, and this was, early last year. So now we're taking all that information and we're looking, how can we take that innovative product through the Department of Children and Families and then expand it across the state so that not only the students can utilize it, the faculty can utilize it, the parents, we're seeing that in the Panhandle, they're utilizing these services. I look at the Facts Your Future drug campaign prevention program that we launched within the schools. As chair of the Children and Youth Cabinet, one of the things that we've really been focusing on is youth suicide. And one of the main components where we left the cabinet was the power and the impact of mentorship. I'm going to get into that in a second too. And we'll even maybe get the incoming Senate President to talk about having a mentor and having a rigorous schedule when he was younger and in high school and had that accountability really propelled him to the success that he's seen today. But we've talked about that in the cabinet, that mentors are so invaluable for the development of our youth. Having a coach that they can go and confide in, having that teacher or someone that they can go, having that outlet is so important. And so that's one of the things we tasked the Children and Youth Cabinet with. And we're waiting on getting Alan Abramowitz, who's with Guardian Ad Litem. He hands that up. He's going to be giving us some intel. And he was looking at best practices way early on for what are some of the best mentorship programs that we can then utilize. And so we're going to be doing more with that. But I think it's really safe to say that this is important. This has always been important. This continues to be important. And we're going to keep working on this because we know that there are tough times. I think we're going to talk about what we're seeing now as far as utilization rates, but what we're anticipating as this lingers on and how this is going to affect. And people who might not necessarily have ever sought help in the past. Now they're thinking to themselves, how do I do this? How do I go and access the help that I've never had to research before? And finding that simplistic way for people to be able to get meaningful help. Because we talk about kids look to their parents. They take their cues off their parents a lot of times. If the parents are stressed, that translates to the kids. And so being in a good place, mental health is extremely important. But I'll tell you this, I'm 100% confident we're going to get through this. I can tell you every day, I wake up and I see the better half of the numbers. I see him work tail off. That's why I joked at the top. I said, it's good to see him again because he's in the office 24/7. I can tell you there's a lot of people who are in the office 24/7 and they're working their tails off. And we're great people. We're Floridians. We're Americans. We're going to get through this. And along the way, if you need a little mental health help, we're going to provide it. We're going to find the 211s. Mm-hmm. And Clara, you've done a magnificent job of giving that outreach.
Thank you very much.
And so if you need the help along the way, we're going to make sure you get that. Because at the end of this, we're going to be bigger, we're going to be stronger, and we're going to be on the right track to seeing success society. It's just a matter of time. And so I'm so humbled to be here to do this. I'm so humbled to have the opportunity through the Better Half to head up another look at how we're going to work mental health throughout the state. And I'm really humbled to be with really great people, one of which is the secretary. We're on the phone with quite a bit. And Secretary, one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is we talk about the Child Crisis Hotline. And that is for if people notice, unfortunately, God forbid, that they're noticing children who are potentially being abused or they're suspects, call that hotline. You've seen a decrease in those calls, and that isn't necessarily something that's good.
No, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Thanks for having me. The Child Abuse Hotline, every year when school lets out, sees around a 25% reduction. So our number one reporter, mandatory reporter of child abuse, are our teachers. And so every summer we see this lag. When the schools let out, we actually saw a greater than normal drop in calls. And it has persisted for some time. So instead of having a two and a half month break where teachers don't get to see the kids, I mean, we're working on a much longer period of time. And so that's one of the things that we're actually very concerned about at the department. There's a number of other child-related issues that COVID has affected. Our courts, in large part, they've switched to telecourt hearings, but there's some proceedings they're not coming without doing it in person. And so we have some children that are probably going to be in the system a bit longer than we would like. And visitation, court-ordered visitation with parents was something that had to be suspended. You have families, foster families out here with their children who, out of the goodness of their heart, are taking these kids into their homes, and then having the children go out to different places. There's a high level of concern. So there's a number of pieces of the child welfare system that have seen some I would call it a step back that focus very heavily on, and we are very concerned about. In general, across, if I may talk a little about the other things we've seen at DCF, we had a significant increase in interest in our SNAP benefits, folks that needed food benefits. We've been able to handle that increased volume successfully. We also, school let out. The free and reduced lunch program that folks really count on during the school year was suspended. I know schools were delivering meals on site. The federal government passed the law. Pandemic and EBT was authorized. We've gotten payment to over 2 million students, Florida students, in the last several weeks. So there's been a lot of positive things happening in that regard. And one of the things I'm glad the governor teed it up on the mental health side. One of the things we're very excited about, I'm going to be able to say that throughout the pandemic, our systems of care, our community-based systems of care, be it welfare, be it mental health, substance abuse, etc., we have not lost the ability to help somebody that needed assistance in each community since COVID began. So our network's on a significant stress test and passed with flying colors. Not saying everything was great. We had to do some pivoting, obviously, on the ground, but our partners have been fantastic. I'm happy to be here with two of them today. But what really happened was telehealth has been around for a long time, and it just hasn't been a significant part of the delivery. And what COVID has done is it's forced us to really jump in and make it a significant part of the delivery. I know there's a lot of people that were confident in it, but there was kind of like, let's hope it goes. I'm going to let you guys talk about how it's gone. But from our perspective, we are seeing some of the top line numbers that we really care about really improve. And so it's something that at the department we're looking at. We don't want to go back. Because one of the problems we have is it's one thing to make services available. It's another thing for a person to actually go. And so I'll let you guys speak to that. But we've seen significant increases in people actually going to the session and getting the help that they need. Very significant in some cases. I'll let you guys give your own numbers, but early on we're talking about 40% difference in show-up rates in some parts of the state. So we're really excited about what we've learned and what we can take forward to help. We obviously have a set of issues that we're concerned about and managing, but I think there's some things we can learn from this that are going to make us better down the road.
Incoming Senate President, I owe you a big thank you. We worked very hard along with the Secretary here on Senate Bill 1326 that the Governor invoked and signed, and we're really appreciative of all of your hard work. We've had conversations on many times about what we can do to benefit Florida's children. It's just that important. I think we're going to see that a lot under your leadership. And not to say anything in front of the press, but you were talking about a person where you said you might not have been the person that you have become and seen the success that you have today had it not been for the accountability that you had when you were in school. Rigorous schedule, you said, not having the opportunity to have a place to go and people to interact with, you might not have wound up as now Senate President.
Yeah, and absolutely, and thank you, First Lady, for your hard work last year on our bills and being really a force to help us get those bills finished. And the Governor's done a great job. And all of these things require great leadership when you're looking at a pandemic. First time I've been through one. I just turned 54 years old, and hopefully this will be the only one. But so when you're, we talked about a couple of things. So bringing permanency to children's lives is going to be very important. Last year, the bills that we worked on helped bring a lot more transparency to the idea that we can get children adopted much quicker and through the foster care system. And so I think going into next year, we're really looking at how do we bring our 33,000 kids that are in foster care today, how do we bring that number down to maybe 10,000 over the next 5 years, where we those children permanency. If you give them permanency, you then have dealt with a lot of the mental health issues and things of that nature that go along with those children's lives. It gives them a real opportunity to be successful. And in my life, we were talking about it with one of our new Buccaneers here, and we were talking about football in high school. And I grew up in a very poor area of the state, Trilby and Waukeechee. Waukeechee's probably the poorest area actually in the state. And we played football, right? And all of us piled in my car and made it home back to Trilby. And of course, if I wasn't at football practice, I'd have been at work more often. And so, but we really enjoyed that discipline and the coaches that we had. And I still have coaches that were on my high school team, live locally. I live in a small town. Really gave us real tremendous guidance through those high school years. And I think that's what's important as we move forward. We have to realize that the consequences of not opening our schools back up in a safe fashion, the mental health effect it would have on all of the students, but in particularly a lot of the students that depend on sports and athletics to go to the next level, to go to college, that help bring discipline to their lives. And I think it's very important that in a safe fashion that we have these, this year, under whatever guidelines we have to do it. It's very important to have sports, the camaraderie. And then I would like to say that in addition, the virtual learning, the virtual telemedicine, virtual learning, all of those things are going to be a part of our lives going forward. The pandemic has certainly speeded those things up. So I'm hopeful that, with our children, that we can make sure that we're providing the right type of technology to where they can have virtual friends when they can't be in. But I hope we get back to normal in a reasonable period of time. And obviously, our pharmaceutical industry, great job. Hope we may have a vaccine here in a few months if that's what Moderna is successful. And so we're looking forward to coming into the next legislative session with all these things in mind: telemedicine, telehealth for our mental health, and to make sure that we can bring our children into some more of a stable and permanency. And then the ones that have permanency that just need somewhere to go, hopefully we can get those children back to normal, going to school, hanging out with their friends, and I know it's very important. And we really appreciate your help in these areas.
Dr. Reeve, from Tallahassee, I'll give you a little background on who he is. He served as serving currently as the CEO of the Appalachian Center in Tallahassee, and he's been doing that now for like 15 years.
15 years.
Now that we're counting. Prior to that, he was a senior psychologist at Bradley Hospital in Rhode Island. He also was a clinical assistant professor at Brown University. And Dr. Reeve, you have a bachelor from Tufts, a master's, PhD from Harvard University, and I know this is something, recently you had a pretty big announcement. You're partnering with the FSU University and your center to provide services to the community of Tallahassee for mood and anxiety. A couple of things. One, you've seen an uptick in people asking for help. And so you say that you think that this is just kind of the start, that we might start to see more of this, more demand for services, more people seeking out mental care help as this goes on.
Yes, thank you, First Lady, and I appreciate very much your having me here today. One of the things there's been a couple of really interesting things that have come out of the pandemic on an emotional and mental health side. And the first piece that I really want to acknowledge, and it goes along with what Secretary Koppel mentioned, is the lead that we've gotten from the DeSantis administration and from the legislature. The maintenance of the huge majority of the mental health programs through a very, very tough budget year, Governor. We very much appreciate that in the field. The leadership around opening up telehealth and telemental health, and that was something that happened in Florida faster than it did in other states, and that was a consequence, a direct consequence of the leadership of the Governor, the First Lady, Secretary Koppel, Secretary Mayhew, which allowed us to do our jobs. And to the point that you were making a moment ago, First Lady, what we saw with that was a pretty significant uptick in kept appointments for our prescribers. So our center in February was doing about 10% of its business via telemedicine on an outpatient basis. We pivoted pretty rapidly to the point that we're now doing about 85% of our outpatient business via telemedicine, and our kept appointment rates for counselors and for psychologists and psychiatrists have actually increased by probably about 30%. They were already reasonably high for the field, but we've seen a real measurable uptick. So I very much appreciate Secretary Koppel, you're talking about wanting to kind of keep that, because I think that's going to be really good for our community. There's another kind of leadership, though, which has also been exhibited by our First Lady and by our administration. There's a stigma about mental illness. There's not even an argument about it. There are all kinds of barriers, historically, emotionally, to people seeking treatment for medical conditions that they need. And the only way to get past that stigma is to have prominent public voices speaking against it. Not just talking against the stigma itself, but talking about mental illness, talking about mental health, talking about anxiety, making it a non-for subject. And that's something that in 35 years in the field I've never seen until now with your administration, and it's remarkable. It's an incredible breath of fresh air, and I think as a field we've made a tremendous leap forward because of the championship. That goes to exactly what we're talking about in terms of the emotional effects of it. Because the basic building blocks of healthy self-esteem for children and for adults have to do with community and connection. That's where it comes from. That's where you kind of learn to work with other people. That's where you learn to work and to love and to connect. And when that building block of community is undermined through necessary social isolation that comes with a disease like this one. What we will expect is an increase, particularly different kinds of anxiety disorders, but through the anxiety disorders and pretty much every kind of psychiatric issue, we're going to see those rise the longer folks aren't able to connect. And I think what's important in what you're doing right now is to make that public, to make that part of the conversation, and to help connect folks with services like the Crisis Center of Tampa, like the other 911 services and immediate services that exist at the state. Because we can have these services, and Secretary Papa can fund them, and the legislature can underwrite them, but if people don't use them, there's not really, we're not getting where we want to be. And as Secretary, we maintained 100% of capacity throughout this crisis. The services are there. We just want to make sure that people are connected and using them, and I think this is exactly the way to get there. So I appreciate that very much.
Great, Dave Bird. Good to see you again. A little bit former director of the Florida Department of Veterans Affairs, and now running for the Senate. You know firsthand one of the passions we've had many conversations about our great veterans. These are men and women who put their lives on the line to protect the freedoms that we hold dear. And oftentimes they suffer, but they do so silently. They don't tell anyone. Proud, they don't want to reach out and admit that they need help. One of the neat things about the 211 that Clara will talk to, and I had the privilege of being here before with the Secretary and others, was talking about the peer-to-peer program. So when someone calls 211 or they call the number that you have specifically for veterans, that they can be patched through to a veteran to have that personal conversation with someone that they can relate to about the crisis that they're having. I know that was something that was near and dear to your heart when you were here trying to make a difference. I mean, after all, we owe it our great folks who have served this country and even our first responders. I know we have a program going through too, because that's often something that we've talked about as well, is our men and women in uniform. They're suffering too with this. So Dave, talk a little bit about what you anticipate, knowing that this is always a really heart-wrenching problem that we see. I hate to even say 21 veterans committing suicide today. That's sobering and very awful statistic.
It is. It's a staggering statistic, and death by suicide amongst our veteran population is absolutely a state of emergency. I'd be remiss if I didn't echo what Dr. Reeves just said, and that's that, make no mistake about it, that this unprecedented crisis that we're experiencing today with the pandemic, we're in a far better position to address these mental health issues because of the spotlight that Governor and your administration has shown from the very beginning, from the first days you were in office. And so thank you for putting us in a position where we can jump on this matter and start to address the second and third order effects that we're experiencing now and will be experiencing for some time due to what we've all gone through now together in this pandemic. So Florida's home to 1.5 million veterans, which makes us, are we the second largest? Have we officially surpassed that?
I think we are second. I don't know that they've made it official yet.
I think it's unofficially official. We'll go with, we're unofficially the second largest veteran population in the nation. And that's a big mission, and that's a big part of the population of the state of Florida. So thank you very much for always focusing in, as a veteran yourself, Governor, and First Lady, for making that a priority to address the unique mental needs of our veteran population. The biggest issue I think facing veterans today, especially when it comes to mental health related issues, is the issue of awareness. It goes back to the spotlight that you've been putting on this. It's making sure that our veterans are connected to the services available to them. And Governor, you helped kick off our Forward March initiative a little while ago. It feels like about an eternity ago now, but I think it was about a year and a half ago. And we traveled the entire state of Florida to try to find and identify organizations like Clara's that connect veterans to the health needs, that are those crisis intervention touch points. And that brings me to Clara, who is an absolute rock star in this field and a dear friend. And Clara, I don't want to steal your thunder because I know you're going to talk about it, but veteran specific, she runs a peer-to-peer network that you're a veteran and you pick up the phone and you're in crisis and you call 1-844-MY-FL-VET. And you identify as a veteran, you're going to be connected to a veteran.